Hi everyone, welcome to my room. I hope you are well today. We are going to be talking about the 5 best jobs for INFJ, and so I imagine that you're excited to hear me talk about this most important topic. Before I do this, just to remind you that I have written a book, The Ecstatic Soul, the most in-depth investigation of the INFJ personality, available for less than $10, ebook format, paperback format, all the links in the description box down below to all the countries. You help me, I help you. If you have any questions, do ask me. I try to answer, I always answer. Okay, so let's move on to our topic. I made a video not long ago about the 5 worst jobs for INFJs, and it seems rather natural for me to move on then to the video that discusses the 5 best jobs for INFJ. And somewhat similarly to the video was about places where you will not find INFJs and places where you will find INFJs that I've been making. You know, I'm going to provide you with 5 examples of jobs. That does not mean that any job not included in that list is not a good job for INFJs. This is my perspective as the particular kind of INFJ that I am. This is not meant to be the be-all and end-all of the good jobs. There are probably also other jobs that are well suited to INFJs, and if there's any suggestion that I missed in that rather small list, please include it in the comments and we can continue the conversation then. Okay, so I want to start, and this is in no particular order. It's not like, least good job or like 5th best job to best job. It's just in no particular order. So first one that I wanted to include is librarian or archivist. With a slight preference for librarian over archivist, the reason being that while both jobs deal with, books, manuscripts, material that is contained, forms of knowledge, basically, librarian is going to have a more social dimension. You're going to have more interactions than when you're dealing with an archivist, and I think that the INFJ craving for interaction with people who have an interest in whatever they're talking about is going to win the day eventually, and so I could see archivist being more of an INFP or an INTP job, but I think it would still suit an INFJ better than most jobs. But librarian has that, like I said, that promise of a higher degree of social interaction, but being surrounded by books, being surrounded by knowledge is a dream for an INFJ, as it would be for a number of IN types. The second is quite a predictable one, and that is teacher. Now, I'm going to surprise you a little bit and say that I think between a teacher and a lecturer, an INFJ is, on average, a little bit more likely to be happy being a teacher. And so at first sight, it might look as if I'm not giving the INFJ enough credit, because lecturer implies getting a PhD, it implies becoming a specialist in a particular field, and therefore it implies, I guess, a certain amount of discipline and also a certain amount of intellectual ability. It's not at all to suggest that INFJs can't be lecturers on intellectual grounds, and in fact many INFJs are wonderful lecturers. We're talking about averages here. And I think that in a lot of situations, in a lot of countries, especially Western countries, where there's a lot of competition over like lecturing positions, the politicking that is involved in the background, all the sacrifices you have to make in order to become a lecturer. I was talking to a friend recently, he's more likely an ENTP, but he talked about the 4 stages of grief, where you start kind of, when you have to get used to the demands that are placed on you when you're a lecturer and forget about all your hopes of that ambitious, deeply personal research that you were looking at. You just have to make a lot of sacrifices. And again, the politics involved are, the more influential, the fewer places are available, and in a lot of Western countries that tends to happen. So it's nothing to do with the lecturing position itself. If an INFJ can get to the lecturing position, I think it would be extremely exciting to them to be an expert and to teach that knowledge to students. But to get there is a very arduous process, and I think that someone who's like a TJ, STJ also, like an STJ or an NTJ, I think would be better suited to have to deal with that politicking as something that is just a means to an end. But for an F type particularly, I think it could be a little bit painful. Whereas a teacher is like, you don't get as much in the way of intellectual stimulation, although you do get more intellectual stimulation than you would get for most jobs. But at the same time, you get that, first of all, there's not as much politicking. It's easier to get, which is important, because not everybody is able to go through like years of uncertain finances when you're a postdoctoral student or anything like that. So teacher ensures also that connection with your students. And I think that the NIFE of the INFJ here is quite similar to the FENI of the ENFJ. It can make for extremely influential and memorable teaching approach. And you could be very, very loved by your students. And that's something that you ought to keep in mind, because INFJs at the end of the day, they like being loved. And they like seeing that they're loved and that they have an influence to get the best out of their pupils. And I think that for this reason, teaching is one of the best jobs for an INFJ. Even though it's not as well paid as some other jobs, it can be precarious in some instances. I think that the potential for happiness is really there. Now, the third pick is an obvious one: psychologist, counselor, psychiatrist. I'm placing all these in this category. What I would say is that obviously the great promise of that job is that you're helping people, your abilities to read people, to get people to open up to you. All these abilities are kind of carved into the INFJ DNA. So it's a job that's going to require INFJs to use skills and aptitudes they naturally have and they love using. And that is going to be a source of tremendous satisfaction. I think that in the case of a psychologist, the one thing to be aware of, because there's always going to be a downside to every job. So, like archivist could be the social aspect, teacher could be the precarious aspect financially in some countries. For psychologists, it's going to be the fact that you're going to be dealing with cases that are very traumatic, people that have been through experiences that you really need to have thick skin. You need to have the mental and moral and physical resources to be able to handle these, and you need to be sure you're that kind of person. This is something that you really need to be aware of if you want to go for that kind of career. But if you can do that, then it can be an extremely satisfying job. It's bound to be in the top 3 jobs for any INFJ, I think. Now, linked to that, but slightly different, is a social worker. Again, social worker requires you to have a certain amount of resilience and the awareness that it's not going to be the most well-paying job in the world. So it's true that if you were like a sort of well-known psychiatrist or a lecturer, you probably earn more money. But at the same time, social worker is something that really appeals to NIFE. And I think INFJs that have a strong FE, like NIFE subtypes of INFJ, are going to be particularly attracted to that kind of job. It's going to, again, muster cognitive abilities that they have built inside them and that it satisfies them to use. I think that next to social worker, I could also have put in like medical professions like nursing and stuff like that. Sometimes we think of the typical nurse as an ISFJ type, but I think that I have met personally in my life INFJ nurses that, and both male and female, because not all nurses are female. Heteronormativity goes both ways, and they were very, very happy with the job, the human element, and it does demand a great deal of emotional intelligence. And again, when you're able to make use of an intelligence that you have, that's going to be always a source of satisfaction, and you're going to feel like you're very valued. So social worker and also nurse would be a good pick. And finally, number 5 is a job that I think is a source of extreme satisfaction to an INFJ, but here the financial condition, the condition of financial security, is the least guaranteed, and that's writer. To be a writer, to literally write books. A bit like myself, I quit my job in the administration, and administration was in my top 5 least good jobs for INFJs. No surprise, it also is coming from experience. To be a writer, to try being a writer, and I can tell you that the autonomy and the freedom and the possibility for creative expression and expression of NI insights, FETI rationalization of the insights, presenting, exchanging with other people, having people react to your work, having people give you feedback, and growing your knowledge, refining your insight in the process, feeling that what's individual about your prescience just gets to have a body of its own. That's something that's unbelievably liberating. But it's true that it requires accepting a certain level of precariousness, at least at first, and you better find a way of writing books that people want to buy, and that's not always something people can do, and it's always a bit of a wager, but it's well worth trying. And I think that there's no surprise if a lot of famous writers are INFJ. It's also because it's a field that has the precise openness that NI is asking for, and if you can add a little bit of self-discipline to that, it can really work for you. So these are my 5 best jobs for INFJs. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give me a comment, drop a like, and consider subscribing. And again, any extra suggestions for jobs, I'm waiting for you to contribute. Have a great Sunday, guys, and see you soon.